A few words about the two stories, Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl and A Woman on a Roof by Doris Lessing. So both of these stories are interesting in their use of characterization. Right? Both use a narrative style, a narrative technique, third person, limited. So the narrator is not part of either story, but we are really focused in and see the thoughts of only one character in each of those stories. So they limit us to a focus on one character in each story. So even though, to take A Woman on a Roof, the title character, the woman on the roof, even though she seems like the character that's has the most attention paid to her, in fact, in that story, the focalized character is Tom, the youngest construction worker. We see his thoughts as the story progresses, and so we get to know him the best of any of them. Conversely, if we think of switch gears and think about the characters that are remaining in that story, so Harry, Stanley, the woman, a couple of other minor characters that show up, they all just serve as focalizers, right? They help us to see a critical moment in young Tom's life as he is undergoing this change. He's going from being an adolescent to being basically an adult. He's got a job and is working and things like that, but it isn't until this encounter with the woman that he has a sort of change of heart. And so it's interesting to sort of look at the characters that we do see most significantly in that story. Tom, and then Stanley, who's slightly older, maybe mid-20s, newlywed, and Harry, who is in his 40s and an established family man. And so what we see is sort of a progression of levels of maturity in these men. And they go from a sort of, Harry who doesn't really care about Tom and Stanley, ogling this woman and whistling at her and harassing her and things like that. He's like, yeah, whatever, that's no big deal. Probably did it himself when he was younger. And then we have Stanley, who's a newlywed, and who gets quite angry at the woman on the roof for reasons that we have trouble maybe determining. It's a matter of inference. But primarily, the fact that she doesn't respond to him seems to be a challenge to his manhood or something, or his machismo, or whatever you want to call it. And he can't take that. He doesn't like the idea that he might pay attention to a woman and she might not pay attention back to him. That's not palatable to him, and so he gets angry. And then we have, and again, but that's again a matter of conjecture, right? It's inference that we're doing when we say that. I think it's informed inference, but it's not directly stated in the story that that's the case. And then we have Tom, who thinks that he's in love with her, who has these fantasies about her at home, where he's in her apartment and it's gorgeous, and she brings him things to drink and sort of waits on him and things like that, which is not an atypical adolescent's fantasy about relationships, but it's not necessarily a really compelling picture of a real relationship either. But he, when he finally acts upon his impulses and goes over and talks to the woman, she remembers him only as the jerky construction guy who was harassing her, and so she disregards him, tells him to go to the beach if he wants to see women in bikinis. And he goes down angry because she doesn't understand how wonderful he is. How could she misunderstand my behavior? But goes down and gets drunk in hatred of her. So he goes from loving her to hating her, and it shows that the time period, which is the early 60s, late 50s, right around there, that's being represented here, shows this real clash of the genders, right? That's happening, but it's not happening in a sort of active way. She's the woman does not get hostile. She doesn't shout at him. She doesn't yell at the men, do anything like that. She's resistant. She just doesn't do anything, right? She's sort of passive about it. she doesn't respond to it at all. Um, and again, that's sort of part of a sort of growing 60s consciousness and movement that saw this kind of the sort of peaceful resistance, right? A sit-in or things like that as a way to resist something. So that so that's an interesting sort of way of showing through this focalized character how relations, between men and women got to the way that they were in the early 60s, and why women might have been finally positioned to resist those things. Interestingly enough, okay, the tone of the story is very objective. It doesn't seem to take a stand one side or the other, right? It just sort of, like Hemingway's story, tells us things, but doesn't seem to be implying one thing is better than another. Okay. Now, if we switch gears and think about the more conventional picture of domesticity in Dahl's story, Lamb to the Slaughter, Mary Maloney, is the perfect wife who just lives to do things for her husband and doesn't want to, rock the boat or do anything like that, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. But when we see that, she's the focalized character, she's the one whose thoughts we see and how she luxuriates in the notion of having her husband at home, and sees him like a fireplace, that warms her or something like that. And then he comes in, drinks mixes some heavy drinks and slugs them down, and then tells her something, and we don't know what the something is. Right? We're not given that. We have to make inferences about it, which is kind of a cool thing in itself. Is it because our perspective, which is limited to Mary's point of view, is it because she's so shocked by it that she can't process it? It's just a blank, and then he told her. That's all there is to it. So we don't have the details. Is he cheating on her? I don't know. Probably. Is he leaving her for another woman? Probably. Maybe for another man? I don't know. I can't imagine in Ireland in the 1950s that would be the case, but you never know. But there's this sense in this story of mystery around exactly what it is that he's done. And she takes action only when provoked by him. And when she has a weapon ready at hand, the leg of lamb, and bonks him on the head and kills him. And then she takes action to save herself. Only, by the way, and this is an important thing to sort of notice, that she doesn't really care about herself at first. She's sort of like, I don't care what happens to me now. I killed my husband, I ought to die. But then she remembers that she is pregnant and she has an obligation to her child and doesn't want it to grow up as an orphan. And so she wants to do something to make sure that she's in her child's life. And that's why she concocts the alibi, and it all works fine. So the end of the story seems to be the place where we get some insight, but we're baffled about it, right? When the men are eating the leg of lamb as a favor to Mary, right, and saying the murder weapon's probably right under their noses, she overhears this and starts to laugh in the other room. What we don't know is whether that laugh is a laugh of hysteria or a laugh of humor, like I got away with it, or what, or if it's the emotions and things that are just overriding and everything. But there is a sort of wryness to the story that makes it kind of humorous at the end, right? I mean, we kind of like Mary Maloney, and we like that she got away with this. So that has to do with that kind of tone qualities, which makes us, sort of think that, well, Mary Maloney killed somebody. That's not a good thing, but her husband was kind of a prick, so maybe he deserved it. So, so that's sort of the tone that the story gives us. It doesn't give us sort of remorse and things like that from Mary, but we are encouraged through seeing her, resourcefulness to like her. So the tone in Woman on a Roof, very neutral, very objective. Not so much in Lamb to the Slaughter, where it seems to be sort of empowering or favoring the empowerment of Mary to take control of her life and do something that's going to end up helping her out, helping her child out, assuring her future. So both interesting stories, aren't they?